Okay, everyone, welcome back again. So let's just continue. Surprise, surprise. So we are looking at this marvelous sutta called the Upakilesa Sutta. I forgot to discuss the word Upakilesa, what it means. Maybe we can do that later on when we actually come to these Upakilesas. But they mean, Upakilesa means something like a defilement of the mind, a corruption of the mind, a blemish of the mind. And these are the things that get in the way of deep meditation, and that's why they are called defilements. This is the idea of Upakilesa. I'll discuss this word in more detail later on, and how it relates to other words that are similar, like kilesa and sankilesa and these kind of things, to get a feeling for what these things actually are. And that can be helpful sometimes. So we have looked at the introduction to the sutta. We have seen how the Buddha is kind of not really appreciated by his monks, and then how the Buddha then decides to leave, and then he speaks these verses just before he is about to leave, and then to kind of make the monks almost like reflect on their actions, and then come to their senses. This particular sutta does not really say what happens afterwards. It doesn't kind of extend the story about the arguing monks. It doesn't say what happens to the monks who were quarreling. But in the Vinaya, it actually talks about that, what happens to the monks who are quarreling. And so then after the Buddha leaves, and the Buddha goes into the forest, and we'll see in a second what happens to the Buddha. But then the monks start to think, the Buddha is gone, what is happening now? And then the lay people take action. And this is kind of very interesting because it shows you something about the interplay between the lay community and the monastic community. And so the lay people decide that these monks are not doing, they're arguing too much, and because they're arguing so much, it's causing a split in the Sangha, and we're not happy with these monks. And so they decide to stop paying respect to the monks and stop supporting them, basically. And then the monks, after a while, they realize that they have gone wrong. They have kind of gone too far. They've gone astray. So sometimes you need a bit of external kind of impetus to understand that you have lost the plot, so to speak. And then they decide they leave Kosambi, where they are staying, and they walk all the way to where the Buddha is. The Buddha is staying in Savatthi, I think. So they walk all the way to Savatthi. It's a long way from Kosambi to Savatthi. I don't know how far it is to walk, maybe several hundred kilometers for sure, maybe up to 1,000 kilometers maybe. It would have taken them a long time. And then eventually when they come to the Buddha, they then ask for forgiveness, and then they are able to reconcile the Sangha again. So it shows you how these things happen. So there's always this interplay in Buddhism between the lay community, the monastics, and we kind of work together somehow to make this whole thing work out. And this is an important part of how the Buddhism, the fourfold parisa, how it actually works and how it operates. But in this particular sutta, this is just the preliminary stages, and now we see what happens to the Buddha after he leaves, and what comes after this. So, coming back to the at the end of the verses, we then continue the story, and then it goes, after speaking these verses while standing, the Buddha went to the village of the child salt miners, where Venerable Bhagu was staying at the time. Bhagu saw the Buddha coming off in the distance, so he spread out a seat and placed water for washing the feet. The Buddha sat on the seat spread out, washed his feet. Bhagu bowed down to the Buddha and sat down to one side. So here we see the Buddha leaving, and then he goes to this village. I think it's the Balakalona Kagamaka or something like that is the name. Venerable Sujato has actually translated it, and I'm not sure if it is right to translate names, but anyway, that's what he has done. So this child salt miners is the Bala Lona Kagama, or something like that. And this is where Venerable Bhagu was staying, so one of the monks, one of the Buddhist monks. And as usual, when you see someone coming in the distance, you kind of prepare a seat for them, and also you prepare some water for them for washing the feet, and sometimes you offer them water for drinking and these kind of things. These are the standard procedures you see in the Vinaya Pitaka, how to kind of welcome a incoming monk, an agantuka bhikkhu, someone who is visiting. And then the Buddha sits down and he washes his feet. And this is also kind of interesting, how in the suttas, when the Buddha arrives somewhere, the other monks don't wash his feet. The Buddha washes his own feet. And that's kind of, again, quite extraordinary. The way we think about the Buddha, we don't normally think about the Buddha in that way. And even in the present day, if you are a monastic, it's quite common to find someone washing the feet for you. But the Buddha washed his own feet. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? You see how things change, and how things kind of, in those days, there seemed to have been sometimes less hierarchy than there is now. It's kind of extraordinary how things sort of become hierarchical over time. And I think this is one of those interesting things about Buddhism in general, how hierarchical it quickly becomes. Buddhism becomes, they use the templates maybe of the Christianity, the Catholic Church becomes the template for how to organize Buddhism. And this is what has happened in places like Thailand, for example, where Christianity was quite used sometimes when the West came to Thailand, starting back in the 18th century. Western ideas started to have some influence. And one of those ideas was how to organize religious organizations. And so one of the kings had this idea that the Sangha should be like the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is just about the most hierarchical organization in the known universe. So it's pretty hierarchical, So that means that Buddhism then takes on these hierarchical things. And it seems like the human mind seems to like hierarchies. We kind of construct things, we make things work somehow. And I'm not sure if that's always is a good idea. At the time of the Buddha, things were far less hierarchical than they are now. At those days, the Sangha was very flat. There was a lot of equality between the various monasteries. The way the Sangha operated, it operated on the base of democracy within the monastic Sangha. And there was no abbots, for example. There was no Sangha hierarchy except for the Buddha. Of course, the Buddha had a special position, but even he was really just a monk in many ways. So it's kind of fascinating to remember that and to see if we can learn something from the earliest period of Buddhism. So then Bhagu, he bowed down to the Buddha and he sat down to one side. And the Buddha said to him, I hope you are keeping well, mendicant. I hope you are all right. And I hope you're having no trouble getting alms food. I'm keeping well, sir. I'm all right. I'm having no trouble getting alms food. Then the Buddha, educated, encouraged, fired up, and inspired Bhagu with a Dhamma talk. After which he got up from his seat and set out for the eastern bamboo park. So this is a kind of standard thing that you see in the suttas a lot. The Buddha will always, first of all, when you start out, you don't start talking Dhamma straight away. First of all, you have some kind words. The Buddha is always concerned about your well-being. The Buddha is like, in some ways, he's like your parent, your father. In the Sangha, you don't really have any family. And so very often the idea, for example, between the Upajjhaya or the Acharya and the student, the Saddhaviharika, is usually a little bit, it's kind of modeled on the idea of a father and a child. So you have a father. And of course, a father is supposed to look after you, and the child is supposed to support the father. So it is modeled on that. There's supposed to be a degree of affection between the Upajjhaya and the Saddhaviharika, between the Acharya and the disciple of the Acharya. And so the Buddha then asks you, like a father might do, are you keeping well? Are you all right? Are you getting enough to eat? That's basically what he's saying. And so it's kind of nice. And you can imagine if the Buddha says these kind of things to you, you feel relaxed. You feel at ease. You feel cared for. You feel there is a good atmosphere. So the atmosphere is kind of set for the Dhamma talk. And then when you are relaxed, then when you are at ease, then the Dhamma talk comes. So everything at the right time and right place to make the Dhamma sink in. If you are kind of tense and nervous, you're not going to be able to hear the Dhamma talk properly. So then we have this usual way of the Buddha. He encourages, he educates you. And education is like the most basic thing about the Dhamma. It's about understanding. So you're educated about the Four Noble Truths, dependent origination, to understand, get some basic right view. And then you are encouraged. This encouragement is then to motivate you to do the practice. And then you are fired up and inspired. And these are the kind of the secondary things. First you understand the Dhamma, and then you are inspired to practice accordingly. So both of these things are very important. And very important, very often in Buddhism, we have enough understanding. We know how the Dhamma works. And when we have enough understanding, we don't often need to inquire so much more about technical issues or what do things mean. Then the Dhamma talk serves more the purpose of inspiring you to put things into practice. A good teacher should have the ability to provide the information, how the things work, what the Dhamma is, but should also have the ability to inspire you. Those two things coming together makes the Dhamma talk usually very powerful. And so you choose a monastery where you feel the teacher can inspire you. This is very significant because then you will be able to do the practice. And then the Buddha goes on, and then he goes to the Eastern Bamboo Park. And so now at that time, the Venerables Anuruddha, Nandaya, and Kimbala were staying in the Eastern Bamboo Park. The park keepers saw the Buddha coming off in the distance and said to the Buddha, "Don't come into the park, ascetic. There are 3 gentlemen staying here whose nature is to desire only the self. Don't disturb them." Okay. I'm not sure, is this Buddhism or is it some other religion? I'm not sure now. We shall find out. So these are Anuruddha, Nandaya, and Kimbala. They are encountered a few places in the suttas. They are like the 3 ideal monks, the 3 monks who live in the right way. And this is one sutta where you find them. And then they're also found in the Chula Gosenga Sutta, I think it is, where they also are. And in the Chula Gosenga Sutta, they have already become arahants. But in this sutta, they are still practicing, trying to achieve samadhi, trying to achieve insight and arahantship. And this is why this sutta is so interesting. How do the ideal monks, how do they live? He sets an example for everyone else. How should we live to actually achieve the same thing? Anuruddha, one of the greatest disciples of the Buddha, and then his friends, Kimbala and Nandaya, how do they practice this path? So this is kind of really interesting, and this kind of gives us a very, I think, a lot of insight in how things are to be done. So they are staying there, and the Buddha wants to visit them because he wants to encourage the good monks. You can see here how these 3 good monks, they are the counterpart to all the bad monks in Kosambi. So it sets up the contrast between how you're not supposed to do things and how you are supposed to do things. The ideal monks versus the less ideal monks. They're not necessarily bad monks. They get carried away for a while. Maybe they actually are really good monks. It's just that defilements got the better of them. But in this context, it's the ideal versus the not ideal. And then you have this situation where the Buddha arrives, and then the park keeper, there's someone looking after these monks, he says, "Ascetic, don't come in, don't disturb these venerables." And again, it is quite fascinating, because once more you get this feeling that the Buddha is really just an ordinary monk. Yeah, this park keeper doesn't recognize the Buddha. He cannot be very special. If he was very special, everyone would know straight away this is the Buddha. He's very tall, or he has the 32 marks of a great man, the Mahapurisa Lakkhana or something like that. You would see straight away that there's some other kind of person. But no, he was just ordinary. People didn't really recognize him. When King Ajatasattu, who was already a disciple of Buddhism for a long time, when he, in the Samannapala Sutta, he goes to see the Sangha, the 1,250 monks, he has to ask, what's his name? The Kumarabhatsha, who is it again? Anyway, he has to ask his attendant, who is the Buddha? Because he doesn't recognize who the Buddha is. It's Jivaka Kumarabhatsha, isn't it? I think it's Jivaka's Ambhavana is where the Buddha is staying. Yeah. And so he asks him, which one is the Buddha? In other words, he was not able to pick out the Buddha in the large assembly of monks. Yeah? The Buddha looked like an ordinary monastic to most people. And so you have this strange situation where the park keeper kind of stops the Buddha. And then you have this interesting phrase here, and I don't really know what Bhante Sujata was thinking when he translated this. There are 3 gentlemen. So gentleman is the Kula Putta. Kula is a clan, a family, a son of a family. This is the establishment in ancient India. So gentleman, I think, is okay. Staying here, whose nature is to desire only the self. Don't disturb them. And I haven't looked up the Pali, but I think the Pali is attakama here. And attakama is like desire. Yeah, it's like usually used about the 5 senses. And atta is oneself. So it can be understood, as kind of desiring the self in a sense. And I suspect that what Bhante Sujata is doing here, he's kind of assuming that in the Indian context, if you are an ordinary Indian, you probably belong to the Brahmanical tradition. You belong to the religion of the time. You're not necessarily, this park keeper probably is not a Buddhist. Who knows what he is. And of course, in that context, you can desire the self, because the self is what all the Brahmins were seeking. The self which then unifies with Brahma when you die. And so in that context, it could actually be right. But very often what these kind of expressions mean, in my understanding, is that they mean that you desire for yourself. It is a reflexive pronoun. So it is like you... I should really have looked this up, the Pali here, because now I'm a bit uncertain what it means. But I think the meaning here really is that you are desiring your own good, so to speak. The self here refers to oneself, one's own good, rather than referring to desiring the self, as in the Brahmanical religion. So anyway, it doesn't really matter. It is just part of the story. It is not fundamentally important, and it shows you that sometimes the interpretation can be problematic. The Buddhist interpretation is really to desire your own good. That would be the Buddhist interpretation from this. So then what happens is that Anuruddha heard the park keeper conversing with the Buddha and said to him, "Don't keep the Buddha out, good park keeper. The teacher, the Blessed One, has arrived." Then Anuruddha went to Nandya and Kimbila and said to them, "Come forth, venerables, come forth. Our teacher, the Blessed One, has arrived." Then Anuruddha, Nandya and Kimbila came out to greet the Buddha. One received his bowl and robe, one spread out a seat, and one set out water for washing his feet. The Buddha sat down on the seat spread out and washed his feet. The venerables bowed and sat down to one side. So this is the standard way of greeting the Buddha. And then the Buddha carries on, just as he did before. The Buddha said to Anuruddha, "I hope you're keeping well, Anuruddha and friends. I hope you are all right. I hope you're having no trouble getting alms food." We are keeping well, sir, we are all right, and we're having no trouble getting alms food. And the Buddha says, I hope you are living in harmony, appreciating each other without quarreling, blending like milk and water, and regarding each other with kindly eyes. Indeed, sir, we live in harmony, as you say. So this is the standard for what it means to live in harmony in the suttas. Appreciating each other, the idea that you look upon each other with kindly eyes and you appreciate each other. And this is one of those very important things. If you want to have harmony, you have an appreciation for your fellow monastics or your fellow lay people. You understand them as good people. You appreciate that they are doing their best. Sometimes they may not be up to the highest standard, but that is to be expected. You still appreciate them for having the basic intention to live a good life. And that is always worthy of respect. Anyone who is trying to live in the right way. So you appreciate each other, and you have, without arguing, you may disagree sometimes. Sometimes you may not have the same ideas about the Dhamma. You may have some disagreements. In fact, that is to be expected. I don't know how many people we are here today, 60, 70 people. Probably everyone here has a slightly different idea of the Dhamma. So if we are not careful, we could very easily end up in big arguments. But it is the ability to disagree without arguing, the ability to disagree in a respectful way, the ability to disagree, to be humble about one's own knowledge, and not to be too attached to one's views. That shows a certain maturity in the Dhamma. So you live together in harmony, even though you may disagree. That is the point. If you wait till you have full agreement, you're never going to have a peaceful moment in your life. Of course, it is also useful to live with people who have a roughly the same outlook as you have. If someone has a very, very different ideas, it makes it very hard to have a discussion about the Dhamma. So we tend to come together around people who think about the Dhamma in roughly the same way. If someone thinks the Buddha didn't exist or the Buddha didn't know what he was talking about, then probably he had no business coming here. It wouldn't make any sense because we have no common ground anymore. There's nothing to really discuss. Or if someone has very different ideas about the path, again, it is better to stay maybe in different monasteries because the ideas are just too different, not really compatible. But in general, you learn to live without argument. And then you have this beautiful idea of blending like milk and water. This means there's no separation. Oil and water, it separates out. Milk and water doesn't separate. It mixes perfectly. And this is the idea here of perfect mixing in this way here. There's no sense of there being thorns, no sense of you have to stay, when someone comes, you take a little detour to walk around them, that's a bad sign usually, if that happens. So you blend, you feel at ease, you feel really at ease with the people around you. That's the idea here, you blend together. And regarding each other with kindly eyes, when you look at your fellow people in the community, you look at them with a sense of friendliness and kindness. That's a nice way of, then you feel welcome, you feel at ease. So then the Buddha asks, but how do you live in this way? And this is really interesting. How do you live in harmony? And this is one of those really beautiful paragraphs that stand out to me when I read this particular sutta. In this case, sir, I think, how fortunate, so very fortunate I am to live together with spiritual companions such as these. I consistently treat these venerables with kindness by way of body, speech and mind, both in public and in private. I think, why don't I set aside my own ideas and just go along with these venerables' ideas? And that is what I do. Though we are different in body, sir, we are one in mind, it seems to me. And this is the ideal, This is how one is supposed to live the spiritual life. It is a very high bar, But I would say that what comes after this, what comes afterwards is the idea of samadhi, how to unify the mind, how to be able to overcome the defilements of the mind, then the achievement of the jhanas. The jhanas are very, very profound states. I think sometimes in modern day we tend to underestimate how profound they are. And then ultimately the achievement of awakening. All of that is founded on this. This is basically how they live their life. And this is what we have to do. And if we can do this sort of thing fully, then I think the path opens up. It's very simple, but it's also very profound. It is simple to understand what we have to do, but in practice it can be hard to actually get it done. So this idea, I am fortunate, very fortunate, to live with spiritual companions such as these. The Sabramacharya are the spiritual companions, the people that we live with. And so this idea to feel that you are fortunate to have these spiritual companions is kind of very beautiful, right? When you look at the fellows in your monastery, when you look at your fellow lay people around you, you look at these people who are doing their best to live well, and you realize you are fortunate. You have the support of other people. We are thinking in the same way. We're going in the same direction. Without these people, maybe you wouldn't be able to make any progress. The ultimate, the final Sabramacharya, the final Kalyanamitta, is the Buddha himself. Without the Buddha, there wouldn't be any spiritual path. We would be nowhere. We would be struggling around in the darkness. The Buddha is the one who lights the light, who makes it accessible to us to achieve this path. And if we live well together, each one of us, we are helping each other to also make that path come alive, make that path actually work. How fortunate I am to have spiritual companions such as these. It is an expression of metta. It is an expression of compassion. It is an expression of friendliness. It is an expression of appreciation of the people around us. And if we can have this idea in our hearts, in our minds, at all times, guaranteed, this path is going to open up, because it means that you always have metta. And if you always have metta, your speech will be good, your bodily actions will be good, and everything becomes very purified as a consequence. How fortunate I am, how very fortunate I am to have spiritual companions such as these. Build up that perception, build up that idea in your mind. And when you build up that idea, how can you ever get angry with anyone? How can you ever get upset? How can you never want to help? How can you not want to be generous? How can you not want to say a kind word to people like that? Everything you do becomes naturally good. Everything you do becomes naturally beautiful with this kind of perception. So this is the sort of thing that we have to do. And then things really open up. Then the path becomes possible. It is so simple, at the same time very profound, because of course these states, these qualities of mind, are not always easy to pursue, and that is precisely why they are worth pursuing. What is easy is not always worthy of pursuit. Sometimes what is difficult can be worthy of pursuit. In this case, this thing here, even though it is difficult, it is really worthy of pursuit. So I consistently treat these venerables with kindness by body, speech, and mind. This is what happens. If you have this idea that you are fortunate to have these companions, of course, this becomes a natural consequence of that. Always with kindness by body, speech, and mind, both in public and in private. When you go back to your kuti, you don't think bad thoughts about these people. You don't say bad things. You think thoughts of kindness. If you speak to someone in private, you say good things about the people because you see their good qualities. This is how this path kind of comes together in a kind of powerful way. The foundations are here being laid, and we need those foundations for the path to really work out. And then you have this idea that I think, why don't I set aside my own ideas and just go along with these venerables' ideas? And that's what I do. Though we are different in body, sir, we are one in mind, it seems to me. And this is another kind of nice way of thinking about how to live in harmony with each other. Because very often when we live together, maybe we have committees who run monasteries, who run organizations or whatever. And whenever you have committees, it is very easy to clash. Yeah, I don't know if you have noticed that. I'm sure it is the same in Sri Lanka as everywhere else. Wherever I travel in the world, committees tend to clash. In Australia they clash, in Singapore they clash, in Malaysia they clash, in Europe they clash, in Sri Lanka. Maybe you don't clash here. If you don't clash here, well done. But I suspect that maybe here too it is just the same, because usually it is human nature. So if we can overcome this tendency to clash, instead do what they are saying here, that I give up my own opinions and just follow along with everyone else. Sometimes that's a very beautiful thing to do. Just to be the worker, just to be the one who does the tasks, and who doesn't really engage so much in the arguments. What a wonderful example that is. And so I think a kind of a beautiful committee is often a committee where everyone has different ideas. And everyone has different ideas. We come together, we discuss, and then you have a vote maybe on which idea to follow, and then everyone just follows along with that. And even though you think that your idea is better, because that's always the case, we always think our idea is the best one, right? Is there anyone who doesn't think their idea is the best one? This is just, of course, otherwise you wouldn't have that idea. So of course you think your idea is the best one. But that ability to let go of even the best idea and just go along with the majority, okay, I will do the work to support the majority even if I disagree. This is like a superpower, the superpower of harmony. It's a wonderful way of living together. In monasteries, it is also very important, because in monasteries we also have to make decisions sometimes, and then we go along with the majority. We go along with what seems right at the time. And it's very interesting. Sometimes much more important than making the right decision is how we implement the decision. So if you implement the best decision in a bad way, by being really rough and trumping through your argument, I'm right, we have to do it this way, creating a lot of disharmony, then the best choice, the best decision becomes a bad one, because the disharmony degrades everything. And then the second best choice may become better. If everyone does it in harmony, it actually improves that choice, because afterwards you work together in harmony and the implementation is easy, and it actually becomes a better decision after all. So it's weird how these things are. It is not obvious how things work in this world. And I like what Ajahn Brahmali often says. He says that more important than the choices that we make, because we never know the outcome of our choices. We never know exactly what will happen. So more important than the choice is the implementation of what we decide. And if we implement it in a good way, if we make the most of whatever we choose, if we do it with our heart and we do it in harmony and we work together, then even poor choices can end up becoming good ones. So there's some very valuable advice here on just how to live in harmony, how to make choices, how to make committees work. There are some committees in this world that actually do work. I was recently in Sydney a few months ago, and I met a small Buddhist organization there, and they were applying some of these principles of working in harmony. And they said that they never really had any arguments. They were actually able to use these principles to work in harmony. And I must admit, I was very impressed. It was a very young organization, young people coming together, and very, very committed to Dhamma, and also very intelligent and clever people at the same time. And they were doing this in the good way. So it can be done. We should never give up. Human nature is not entirely irredeemable, or whatever you want to call it. It is possible. Human nature can be used in good ways to make things work properly. Okay, so then the Venerables Nandya and Kimbila spoke likewise. And they added, that is how we live in harmony, appreciating each other without quarreling, blending like milk and water, and regarding each other with kindly eyes. And the Buddha says, good, Anuruddha and friends, but I hope you live diligently, keen and resolute. And diligent, keen and resolute, these are the words I mentioned yesterday. This is apamatta, atapi and pahitatta. These are the three Pali words behind this. And as I mentioned yesterday, I personally don't prefer the translation diligent. I prefer the translation heedful or careful or something like that. Heedful is actually a nice one, I think. It implies a degree of wisdom. Yeah. So you are wise, you are keen. Atapi means that atapi is very similar to padana and virya. And so keen, I think, is okay. Yeah, it is a keenness to do things, this willingness, this desire to put forth effort and to put forth energy. And pahitatta, resolute. Sure, I think resolute is kind of fine. Resolute is also similar to adhitthana. We were trying to discuss adhitthana earlier on today. So resolve is one of the ways that adhitthana can be translated. There was another translation I saw of adhitthana which I thought I liked, but I can't bring it back now. Okay, I'll talk about that later. So anyway, different contexts mean slightly different things. So, indeed, sir, we live heedfully. But how do you live heedfully? So now this is kind of interesting. How do you live diligently as a monastic? We were talking yesterday, someone was asking the question, what does it mean to put forth right effort on the Buddhist path? If you're just supposed to sit back and allow the breath to kind of happen, meditation to happen, what does it mean to make right effort? Well, now you get an idea what it actually means, because this is these words that mean right effort, pahitatta, etc. And Anuruddha says, in this case, sir, whoever returns first from alms round prepares the seats and puts out the drinking water and the rubbish bin. If there's anything left over, whoever returns last eats it if they like. Otherwise, they throw it out where there is little that grows or drop it in water with no living creatures or few living creatures. Then they put away the seeds, the drinking water and rubbish bin and sweep the refectory. If someone sees that the pot of water for washing, drinking, or the toilet is empty, they set it out. If he can't do it by himself, he summons another with a wave of the hand. And they set it out by lending each other a hand to lift it. But we don't break into speech for that reason. And every 5 days we sit together for the whole night and discuss the Dhamma. That is how we live, heedful, keen, and resolute. It's kind of interesting, yeah? So that is the answer to the question you asked yesterday. I was going on about using wisdom power, but actually, maybe it's even more basic than that, yeah? This is how you live with a kind of right effort. You could call this right action as well, if you like, but this is one way of thinking about right effort on the path. So what does this actually mean? Well, what it means you do your duties, yeah? You do what you have to do, and then whoever comes last, does the job that is left over. You just kind of do the job that is kind of there to be done. And if anyone sees that the job needs to be done, if someone sees that the pot of water is empty, they don't kind of just leave it, but they just do it because they see it as empty. They see it as an opportunity to be generous, to do an act of kindness. So whenever you see an opportunity to do something because it needs to be done, you just do it quietly. It's kind of a very nice way of living. Everyone just takes their turns and they do what they have to do, and if something needs to be done, they see it as an opportunity. And even if you are the only person who does that, if you're the only monk or the only nun in the monastery who does that, don't ever feel resentful. Rather understand that you are the wise person. You are the one who takes the opportunity to do things when it is needed. You are making merit. You are making good karma. The other ones in the monastery or in the lay community, they are missing out the opportunity. Why? Because they haven't got enough wisdom to understand what is good. This is a very beautiful way of thinking about things. It means you never feel upset because other people don't do anything. You see everything as an opportunity just to give service, to provide service. Don't do too much. If you do too much, you just tire yourself out, of course. But whenever you feel it is the right time, then you take these kind of opportunities. And I have often found in communities like at the Bodhinyana Monastery in Perth, sometimes things happen that very rarely happen in life. I remember just the other day, just a few days before I came here, I was doing some washing, and I forgot the washing in the washing machine, and I left it there for a few hours. And when I came back to get it, the washing had been dried. Someone had put it on the line. Then they had taken it off the line, folded it up nicely, and put it in the basket. And so when I came, everything was there, waiting for me in the basket folded up. And perhaps you think, well, that's because I'm a senior monk. But no, that is not the case, because no one knew whose robe it was. These were just my work robes. No one knows whose it was. They had just done it for whoever had forgotten the things in the washing machine. Yeah, and that is so beautiful. And when you see that, and you come there, it feels really nice. Someone has really been taking care. Someone has been going out of the way to do something kind. Yeah, and this is an all-male community. Yeah, sometimes we don't think about males doing this kind of things, but good males, yeah, they do this kind of things. So there's this beautiful idea of generosity and kindness in action. This is how monasteries, when a monastery really works well, this is the sort of thing that hopefully you can see in the monastery, not always, but at least sometimes. So you do things because you see them as opportunities of kindness. You see them as a way of supporting your fellow monastics, your fellow nuns, your fellow lay people, whatever it is. Yeah, and then that is how you create this beautiful harmony, the sense of working together, and you become happy when you see other people doing it, and you become even more happy when you do it yourself. Very simple things, but really fundamental to make these things work. And then you don't even break into speech, you just wave someone over, and then you do it together, working together in harmony in this way. So you don't speak very much, but then every 5 days you sit down and you talk about Dhamma for the whole night. That's kind of amazing, the whole night of Dhamma discussion. And so here we spread it out a little bit more, which probably is a good idea. If we sat down, maybe next time when we met the Vihari, we should sit every 5 days the whole night and have Dhamma discussion, just to see if that works. Actually, I'm not sure if that is the best way of doing it. Anyway, it is interesting that they actually did that. And that is how you live, diligent, keen, and resolute, or heedful, keen, and resolute. So again, fascinating. Yeah, the simple wisdom, the simple actions is how you do the right kind of effort. Of course, there is much more to right effort, but this is like the foundation. So once we have established a foundation, very interesting, then it goes straight to the high states of meditation. Yeah. So now let me just read the next little paragraph here. The Buddha says, "Good, Anuruddha and friends, but as you live heedful like this, have you achieved any superhuman distinction in knowledge and vision worthy of the noble ones, and meditation at ease? Or have you achieved any superhuman qualities, any distinction in knowledge and vision worthy of the noble ones?" This can be translated in slightly different ways. A meditation at ease. So it goes straight from the very simple things to the most profound things. Superhuman qualities, this is the Uttari Manusa Dhamma, the distinction in knowledge and vision worthy of the noble ones. This is the Alang Arya Nanadasana Visesa. And meditation at ease is the Pasuvihara, I think. something like that. So it goes straight from the very simple things to the most profound things. And I think what that shows us is that these simple things that you see here, if you do them fully, if you practice like this fully, it takes you directly into deep meditation right away, because your mind is in the right place. You already have the metta, you have all the qualities in the mind that are required for deep meditation to work. So this is a kind of a very simple and nice way of thinking about the path. These are the great ideals of ancient India. This is how the great arahants practiced. This is how it works. This is how you make the path working. Simple yet profound. So, what is the answer to this question? So now we're going to get into these deeper states. And this is where it actually all gets also very interesting. So let's see what happens next. And this is what Venerable Anuruddha replies. Well, sir, while meditating, heedful, keen, and resolute, we perceive both light and vision of forms. But before long, the light and vision of forms vanish. We haven't worked out the reason for that. So here we have this idea of light, and the Pali word for that is obhasa. You perceive light, it's obhasa, sanya, or something like that. And vision of forms here is rupa. So you see vision of rupa, and you see light. And this is the sort of thing that you see when meditation goes deep. Many of you will have had these kind of experiences. It is quite not that uncommon. And if you have had, you are in very good company. You are in the company of some of the greatest arahants in the history of the world. These are the monks here are practicing in this way. And what of course is interesting here is that even though they get these things that we call nimittas, a nimitta is precisely a light that has a certain shape. That is what a nimitta is. And so they had these nimittas, and then after a while they disappear. And this is what everyone talks about. I get this light, but it doesn't last very long. It flashes for a while, it disappears. How can you make it last longer? And this is exactly the question that Anuruddha asked the Buddha 2,500 years ago. And now you ask the same question of Ajahn Brahmali maybe, or whoever you take as your teacher. It's exactly the same thing. And so it shows that you are in incredibly good company. So if you are getting these things in your meditation, you are already doing incredibly well. You are in the company of these superhuman beings almost, going back into the early history of Buddhism. So don't despair if you cannot hold on to those lights. Don't think that you are a bad meditator. You're already doing very, very well. Even if you haven't got there, even if you're just enjoying the breath meditation, already you are doing really well. Little bit more, and then you get to these lights in the mind. So what a wonderful thing that is, right? How uplifting it is to think that we are in the company of these wonderful masters of the ancient times. They also had the obhasa. They also had the vision of forms. So this is what these lights are. So what exactly are these lights in the mind? How do they appear? How should we expect them to be when they come? And these lights can take a variety of different forms. Some people, they see them more as a dispersed thing. They're not really unitary. They can be more dispersed. They can be like many lights, or they can be a diffusion of light. Some people just feel the whole kind of screen of perception is bright. That may not yet be the real nimitta, so maybe you have to be careful with that one. But very often you'll just see like the moon or the sun or something like that. And if it is the moon, it means the nimitta is not very strong yet. It needs to be strengthened up. It needs to be made more bright. If it is more like the sun, it's a very powerful nimitta. It means you're brightening it up, energizing it. So it comes in these various ways. And because it is a rupa, because it has a form, it can often come in different shapes. You can see it in different ways. Some people even experience different colors. But the best kind of nimitta is the simple nimitta, the nimitta which is very, just like a round sun or something like that. And also, when it is very bright, that's also the best kind of nimitta. But if you start getting lights, it means you're already in the territory. You're already approaching something very positive, and you just need to kind of simplify it down to something which is more powerful. So this is what this is about, the rupa, the form and the light in the mind. This is what this is talking about. We have to be a little bit careful, however, because some people have very visual minds, and if someone who has very visual mind, they can create these things with the mind like visions. And if you create it like a vision, it is not the same as a real nimitta, as a real obhasa. A real obhasa is something that arises in the mind because of the power of the piti and the sukha. It comes by itself. It is not something that you see. Some people can close their eyes and they can see anything. They have a very powerful visual ability. But this does not depend on you creating a vision in your mind. This happens, the mind creates it by itself. And you are more like the passenger. You are subject to these things rather than creating it yourself in this way. So this is what this is about. In those days, they didn't call it nimittas, they called it obhasas and forms. And so it seems that even in those days, this was a very important part of meditation, and presumably it is the standard way by which to go through the experience and into the samadhi experience. So, Anuruddha says that they vanish, they're not able to sustain. And then he asks this very important question. We haven't worked out the reason for this. Why is it that we cannot sustain these things? And this is one of those very important questions that we should always ask ourselves in the Dhamma. Everything in the Dhamma is conditioned. Everything happens because of cause and conditions. And if something does not work, the proper inquiry is always to ask why. What is going wrong? There is guaranteed a certain causality here. There's no such thing as a person who is born as a bad meditator, Or even if you are born as a bad meditator because the cause and conditions are bad, you can change it, because you can change the cause and conditions. So this inquiry into cause and conditions is one of the very important things that we do on the Buddhist path. And this is what you should do after your meditation. This is what you should do every now and again in your Buddhist life. Is my mind, am I becoming more kind? Am I becoming more tolerant? Am I becoming more of all of these good qualities? And if you are not, ask yourself about the cause and conditions. This is the right kind of inquiry. And the Buddha replies, well, you should work out the reason for that. And then the Buddha says, before my awakening, when I was still unawakened but intent on awakening, I too perceived both light and the visions of forms. But before long, my light and vision of forms vanished. So it is not just the greatest arahants in the history who had this problem. The Buddha, to be, before his awakening, also had this problem. So in other words, it is very profound. And this gives us an idea how deep you already are if you're able to see these kind of lights. So this is one of the ways of knowing whether you are seeing the real thing or not. It is supposed to be a very profound experience. The bliss is already very powerful. The stillness is already really coming together. You are kind of on the verge of feeling that you're entering a different reality, a different world when these nimittas come. These are not just ordinary things. They are Uttarimanusa Dhammas. They are talked about as here, or at least maybe not quite Uttarimanusa Dhamma, but on the doorstep to the Uttarimanusa Dhammas. So even the Buddha had this problem, or the Buddha to be, rather. So this was before his awakening, and so this is one of the suttas where the Buddha talks about his before his awakening experience. And again, you will notice here that this translation here, he says, when I was still unawakened, Pubbe me Sambodha or something, but intent on awakening. Intent on awakening. You know what the Pali word is? Bodhisatta. That's the Pali word behind that. And very often, when you read the suttas translated into English, they don't translate that word, or they translate it from bodhisatta into bodhisattva, which is hardly a translation at all, basically leaving it as it is. But I think the idea that it means intent on awakening is very interesting, because the idea of the bodhisattva, the idea of the person striving to become awakened, this idea, the person who goes on for 4 incalculable eons, the person who bows down under the previous Buddha Dipankara, the ascetic Sumedha, who bows down and makes a vow to become a Buddha in the future, that is the Buddha of legend. That is the Buddha of mythology. The Buddha of the suttas is the Buddha who goes forth in this last life. And basically from that point, when he goes forth, that is when he is a bodhisattva. And the word satta in Pali can also mean intent on, devoted to, right? So you are intent on bodhi, intent on awakening. And I like this translation. I think this was proposed a while ago by one of the famous Sanskrit scholars in England. He was a professor at Oxford University who said that, well, the Pali word here, it could very well be equivalent to the Sanskrit word sakta or shakta. I'm not sure exactly how it is pronounced. Which means intent on or devoted to. And this has then been taken up by Bhante Sujato, that suggestion here. And that makes a lot of sense to me. We are then reading the suttas as they stand, rather than reading the suttas through the interpretation of the commentaries, through the interpretation of later traditions. And that makes them come alive, to my mind, in a much better way, when we see it that way. So the bodhisattva really is the person who practices in this life, when he decides to renounce the home life and become an ascetic. And I think that was actually one of the translations Ajahn Sarno of Aditana was actually devoted to her, which is a nice one. It has less of a forceful feeling than determination, so devotion to her. So now we are coming to the Buddha, and of course the Buddha, before his awakening, he has gone through this whole process. He has had the same problems, and now the Buddha is going to teach us through his own experience how he overcame these problems. And again, I want to make the point, what is interesting, given a retreat in the past, I can't remember what exactly I taught on the last retreat, last time I was here in Sri Lanka, which is now almost 5 years ago, I think. I think times go quickly when you have COVID and all kinds of things happening, wars and whatever. But one of the retreats, themes that I have been using in the past is the idea of taking the Buddha as your teacher. And the idea of taking the Buddha as your teacher is to look at all the suttas where the Buddha talks about his own life. What did he say? How did he practice? And this is one of the suttas where the Buddha talks about his own life, how he practiced. But to make that possible, as I mentioned earlier on today, to make that meaningful, we have to understand the Buddha as a human being. Because when the Buddha is a human being, when he encounters the same problems as we have, then we can learn from the Buddha in a very direct and immediate way. And what is interesting, when you read the suttas like the Dveda Vitakka Sutta, the Buddha says, before my awakening, I also had desires. I also had vyapada. Maybe not very strong, but he had these things, at least to some degree. The Buddha says before his awakening he had attachments. He had a wife, he had all these belongings, he had a son and all of these kind of things. He had these attachments. Before his awakening he says he had wrong view. So you can see when you put together all these little bits about who the Buddha was, he starts to sound like an ordinary human being. He starts to sound a little bit like us. Yes, he had very powerful spiritual qualities, but his basic problems, the basic issues that he had to resolve in his life, were the same issues that we have to resolve. And once you start to think of the Buddha like that, then you want to really ask the Buddha. You want to go up to him and say, please, Venerable Sir, please say, I have this problem. What should I do about it? And then you can have a direct communication with the Buddha in a much more immediate way. And then you can take him as a teacher in an easier way than otherwise would be possible. So that is what we have to look forward for tomorrow. We're going to look at this in a bit of detail, how to overcome all of these little barriers and obstructions to samadhi. So if you're interested in that, please come out tomorrow morning. If you're not interested, then do as you see fit. So that is all for now. So please continue having a nice afternoon, and we'll see you back again at 6 o'clock.